Did you ever imagine a moment where America's most beloved actor would stand on national television and call a British prince a traitor? Not in passing, not jokingly, but with calm, piercing conviction that made every viewer in the room hold their breath. This is that moment. Tom Hanks, Hollywood royalty, a figure synonymous with warmth, decency, and charm, leaned forward under the bright studio lights of late night with Seth Meyers and delivered words that would ripple across the globe. And the target? None other than Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. But why would Tom Hanks, a man whose career spans decades of iconic roles and whose reputation is nearly flawless, publicly attack a prince? Why now and why in this way? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the tension in the studio. The cameras panned across an audience frozen in anticipation. The laughter tracks, the polite applause. They all stopped the moment Tom's words landed. The air was thick with disbelief, and Harry, sitting there, must have felt every ounce of weight behind them. Can you picture it? A prince, accustomed to pomp, privilege, and protection, suddenly confronted not by royalty, but by a Hollywood legend whose mere presence commands respect. It was a collision of worlds, one that would not just shock viewers, but also ignite a firestorm in media outlets, social media, and palace corridors alike. But let's step back for a second. Tom Hanks didn't make these remarks out of the blue. There was context, history, a chain of events leading up to that very second. And the stakes were higher than anyone could have anticipated. This wasn't just an offhand jab at a royal figure. It was a public indictment, one that carried subtle warnings, hidden messages, and consequences that would follow Harry for years to come. People will say it's just celebrity gossip, but think about it. How often does Hollywood intervene in monarchy? How often do figures from vastly different worlds collide in such a public, dramatic, and utterly unforgettable way? Not often. And that's exactly why you need to pay attention. For weeks leading up to the interview, whispers had been circulating in Hollywood and royal circles alike. Staffers, aides, insiders, even studio security had all noticed the palpable tension whenever Harry's name came up. There were cryptic remarks, fleeting glances, and half-smiles hiding full-blown exasperation. Some claimed it was Harry's public behavior. Some said it was the fallout from his Netflix projects and public commentary on family matters. But whatever the exact trigger, by the time the lights in the Meyers studio dimmed and the cameras started rolling, Harry was walking into a minefield, and the explosions were about to begin. And then, there's Tom Hanks himself. America's favorite actor, known for a career marked by kindness, integrity, and memorable performances in films like Forrest Gump, Castaway, and Saving Private Ryan, had a public image so untouchable that even a whisper of criticism carried immense weight. So when he leaned forward and chose his words carefully, it wasn't just criticism, it was a verdict. And in the world of public perception, a verdict from Tom Hanks is almost untouchable. But what made it so shocking was not the words alone. It was the history behind them, the subtlety of the delivery, and the very real consequences that Harry would now face. Let's pause and ask, have you ever been in a room where silence screams louder than words? That was the studio that night. The audience, many of whom had come to laugh, watch, and enjoy a standard late-night show, suddenly became witnesses to a cultural earthquake. Some shifted in their seats, others leaned forward, trying to catch every nuance. And Harry? He likely felt the full weight of every eye, every camera, every heartbeat focused on him. This was not a moment of lighthearted banter. It was a moment where Hollywood and royalty collided, and the repercussions would not stop at the studio doors. Now, here's where it gets even more compelling. While many viewers assumed this was a simple celebrity feud, insiders suggest a deeper story was unfolding behind the scenes. There were private conversations, texts, and leaked commentary that hinted at frustration, disappointment, and perhaps even betrayal long before this interview ever took place. Imagine Harry's aides scrambling, trying to manage a storm that had already begun to form months earlier. Imagine the internal conversations. What will Tom say? How should we respond? Can we contain this? And the most pressing question, was there any way to prepare for what was about to happen? The answer, it seems, was no. But you might wonder, why call Harry a traitor specifically? Why choose such a loaded word in a live, televised setting? Words like these are not thrown around lightly, especially by someone like Tom Hanks, whose reputation is built on careful choices and public trust. Traitor, betrayal, disloyalty. These are terms loaded with centuries of cultural and historical weight, especially when aimed at a royal figure. The implication goes beyond personal criticism. It challenges loyalty, questions motives, and implies moral failure. And the timing? Perfectly calculated to leave maximum impact, to ensure that the moment would not just be heard, but felt deeply by every viewer watching. Let's take a moment to consider the broader context. Prince Harry has been navigating a complex and controversial path for years. From stepping back from royal duties to publicly airing grievances about his family and the institution, from massive media deals to international interviews, he has often walked the tightrope between public fascination and scrutiny. And now, he faces an unexpected adversary. Not the press, not the monarchy, but one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. This is a dynamic rarely seen in public life, a collision between celebrity influence and royal legacy. The tension is almost cinematic, yet it's real, unfolding in real time, and with very real consequences for Harry's reputation and legacy. And while the studio audience was reacting, the world outside erupted. Social media exploded within minutes. Clips were shared, debated, dissected. Headlines screamed, analysts weighed in, and commentators argued over the meaning and implications. Some praised Tom Hanks for speaking truth to power. Others accused him of overstepping boundaries. Yet one thing remained certain. The moment had entered the public consciousness in a way few expected. And for Harry, the fallout was just beginning. He would have to navigate not just public perception, but personal reflection, palace politics, and Hollywood scrutiny all at once. But what's even more intriguing, and what keeps this story gripping, is the web of subtle cues, hidden messages, and private reactions that accompanied that single word. Traitor. It wasn't just a label. It was a trigger, a signal, a warning. And while viewers at home were processing the shock, insiders were already interpreting layers of meaning, connecting dots that most people would never see. The story wasn't over once the cameras stopped rolling. It was just entering a new phase, one that involved leaks, private conversations, strategic damage control, and perhaps even revenge. So, you have to ask yourself, how does a moment like this change the trajectory of a public figure's life? How does it alter perceptions, relationships, and alliances in ways that no one can immediately measure? That's the heart of this story. Because when someone like Tom Hanks, a symbol of trust and decency, calls a prince a traitor, it reverberates far beyond the studio. It challenges narratives, alters alliances, and invites the world to question everything Harry thought he controlled. It's a story about betrayal, about influence, about perception, and most importantly, about consequences that ripple far beyond a single interview. And just when you think the story has peaked, there's more. Because Harry's response, or lack thereof, was being dissected frame by frame. His body language, his facial expressions, even the slight shifts in his posture were analyzed for hidden meanings. Was he defensive, hurt, angry, or calculating his next move? Meanwhile, Tom Hanks' calm, unwavering demeanor only amplified the impact of his words, leaving viewers and insiders alike stunned. The tension between charm and confrontation, celebrity and royalty, control and exposure, reached a peak that night, one that would linger in conversations, headlines, and social media threads for weeks, months, perhaps even years. And now, as you sit there wondering what exactly happened next, one thing is certain: the story doesn't end with that one word. Behind the cameras, in private texts, leaked footage, and whispered conversations, the real drama was only beginning. There are layers, twists, and revelations yet to unfold. Details that will challenge your assumptions, shock your expectations, and leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about Prince Harry, Tom Hanks, and the collision of worlds that occurred in a single, unforgettable moment. Prince Harry thought he was walking into a routine late-night interview. After all, he had done dozens of them before, interviews that were carefully scripted, polished, and choreographed to perfection. He thought he knew the rules: charm the audience, smile for the cameras, deliver your message, and exit gracefully. But this night was going to be different. Much, much different. Because while Harry was rehearsing answers, polishing anecdotes, and preparing to project charm, there was one person in the room whose presence would turn that routine into a spectacle of shock, tension, and humiliation. That person was Tom Hanks. It started weeks before the taping. Harry's publicists had been in a frenzy, coordinating schedules, checking scripts, and trying to gauge the mood of a late-night audience. But there were whispers behind closed doors. Insiders at the studio spoke of Tom's curiosity about the Sussexes, about Harry's recent Netflix controversies, and even about his relationship with Meghan Markle. Tom's always paying attention to these cultural shifts, one insider would later reveal. He notices things most people overlook, and he has a way of bringing them into the light when it matters most. Meanwhile, Harry's aides were juggling a storm of responsibilities. They had to account for every question, anticipate every curveball, and prepare statements in case things went sideways. They were nervous, not just about Harry, but about the dynamics that had been building between Hollywood and royalty for years. There were subtle warning signs, small things that in hindsight seemed like red flags. A producer would drop a casual comment about Tom's disdain for people who exploit privilege. An assistant would overhear Tom rehearsing lines with the crew in a way that hinted he had something more serious in mind. Little by little, the tension was building. And then there was Harry himself. Publicly confident, privately anxious. He had spent months trying to project control over his narrative, stepping back from royal duties, managing a multi-million-dollar media empire, and publicly expressing his grievances about family dynamics. Yet, despite all the preparation, something about the studio, the lights, and the knowledge that Tom Hanks would be there unsettled him. Imagine standing in that brightly lit studio, audience in place, cameras rolling, and knowing that someone revered by millions is watching you, not with admiration, but with a critical, piercing gaze. The weight of that moment was almost tangible. Even Seth Meyers could sense it. The host, known for his sharp wit and timing, noticed the subtle tension between his guest and his legendary co-guest. As the cameras rolled, Seth's usual playful banter carried an edge. He attempted to ease the room with jokes about Hollywood versus royalty, but the laughter was nervous, tinged with apprehension. There was something in the air, a mix of anticipation and fear, that no amount of humor could diffuse. Backstage, the staff were whispering. There were hushed conversations about Tom's intentions, theories about why he had accepted the appearance, and speculation about what he might say. Some were nervous for Harry. Others, quietly, were fascinated by the potential drama. How often does Hollywood intersect with monarchy in such a charged, unpredictable way? Rarely. And when it does, the fallout is always explosive. Even before the cameras started rolling, subtle dynamics were at play. Harry's posture was slightly rigid, his hands clenched in ways that suggested underlying tension. Tom Hanks, calm and composed, carried an aura of authority and precision. The juxtaposition was stark. Royalty, accustomed to adulation and deference, versus Hollywood royalty, commanding respect through talent, reputation, and moral authority. You could almost feel the collision in the air, the invisible clash of worlds that was about to explode in a moment that no one would forget. And it wasn't just the studio crew who felt the tension. Word had leaked to the media that Harry was appearing alongside Hanks, and rumors began circulating online. Social media accounts speculated about what would happen, creating a pre-show buzz that made the stakes even higher. Could Harry hold his own under the scrutiny of someone who wasn't just a Hollywood icon, but also someone who embodied moral authority in the eyes of millions? The pressure was immense. But the real tension was personal. Sources later revealed that Tom Hanks had been observing Harry for months. Not publicly, not aggressively, but quietly, noting his actions, reading between the lines of interviews, and understanding the subtle contradictions in Harry's public persona. Hanks was not only aware of Harry's public controversies, but also the private whispers of palace aides, Hollywood insiders, and people close to Meghan Markle. Every interview, every Netflix project, every public statement had been analyzed. And now, he had an opportunity to confront Harry on a platform that would ensure the world was watching. Imagine the thought process in Harry's mind as he walked toward the stage. He might have assumed it would be a typical interview, perhaps a little playful banter, perhaps a chance to charm America once again. Instead, He was walking into a high-stakes chess game, unaware of all the pieces already in motion. And that's what made the evening so charged. Because while the audience saw smiles and greetings, behind those smiles was a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. The stakes were not merely ratings. They were reputation, legacy, and personal pride. And then there's the irony. Harry had spent years carefully curating his image as a modern royal, someone approachable, relatable, and human. He had stepped back from traditional roles, engaged with media, and even used Hollywood to amplify his message. Yet, all of that preparation now collided with a figure who represented everything Harry aspired to emulate: charm, credibility, and moral authority. And in that collision, one misstep, or one perfectly timed word, could change everything. The buildup was about more than just nerves or anticipation. It was a powder keg of history, perception, and expectation. The audience didn't yet know it. The staff didn't yet know it, and Harry himself couldn't fully grasp it. But within moments, all the elements would align, and the room would be charged with an energy that only rarely occurs on live television. The moment when words could reshape a public figure's narrative forever. Backstage, Meghan Markle's team was watching anxiously. They had coached, prepared, and anticipated every question. But they could not prepare for the presence of someone who had no obligation to be kind or deferential. They knew that Hank's reputation as America's sweetheart gave his words an outsized power. And they knew that if Harry stumbled, even slightly, the repercussions could be monumental. And what about Harry himself? Sources later revealed he was aware, at some level, that this interview carried risk. But perhaps he underestimated it. Perhaps he assumed that Tom Hanks, known for his warmth, would approach him with kindness. But in this world, kindness and accountability are not always aligned. Hanks had an agenda, and it was one rooted not in malice, but in principle. A principle that would soon confront Harry in a way no PR team could mitigate. The audience, seated and ready, remained unaware of the backstage tension. They expected a typical late-night interview, a little humor, a little charm, a few laughs. What they didn't anticipate was a confrontation that would challenge not only Harry's composure, but also the carefully crafted narrative he had built over years. Every smile, every nod, every pause was about to be dissected, analyzed, and interpreted in ways that would ripple across media platforms and social networks. And then the cameras rolled. Harry walked on stage, smiling politely, shaking hands, projecting confidence. But inside, there was a storm brewing. Every word he had rehearsed seemed suddenly fragile under the scrutiny of a man who had spent a lifetime observing people, understanding their motives, and recognizing contradictions. Tom Hanks, calm, collected, and poised, waited. And the audience, completely unaware, sat in anticipation, feeling the tension without knowing why. And that, right there, was the critical moment. The stage was set. Every element was aligned. Every participant, Harry, Meghan, Seth, Hanks, the audience, was in place. The only thing remaining was the spark that would ignite the powder keg. And that spark? It was about to come in the form of a single word, carefully chosen, piercing, and unforgettable. Why would Tom Hanks, a man celebrated for his warmth, integrity, and everyman charm, step onto a late-night stage and publicly call a British prince a traitor? That's the question everyone was asking after the explosive segment aired. On the surface, it seemed shocking, almost unbelievable. After all, Tom Hanks is the embodiment of decency in Hollywood. He's the guy people trust. The guy who plays heroes, fathers, mentors, soldiers, and survivors, always with heart and authenticity. But beneath the smile, beneath the casual banter and polished Hollywood persona, there was a purpose, a deliberate agenda, and a reason why Prince Harry had walked into a verbal storm he never saw coming. The story begins months before the fateful interview. Sources from inside the studio and Hollywood insiders alike confirmed that Tom Hanks had been quietly observing Prince Harry for some time. Not publicly, not on social media, not for attention, but as a man who pays attention, who notices patterns, who sees through narratives. Friends close to Hanks would later reveal that he was concerned, not about gossip, not about ratings, but about integrity, perception, and the broader message Harry was projecting. Hanks had been watching Harry's public trajectory, stepping back from royal duties, controversial Netflix deals, public interviews that painted his family in a negative light, and the subtle contradictions between what Harry projected and what insiders claimed he actually did behind closed doors. There were also whispers of private Hollywood conversations that few knew about. In elite circles, Hanks is known as someone who holds others accountable. His influence in Hollywood isn't just about box office numbers. It's about morality, reputation, and maintaining a standard. And Harry, in many ways, had become a symbol of everything Hanks found problematic in celebrity culture. Privilege unchecked, public grievance untempered, and personal ambition played out on a global stage with consequences for millions of people. Hanks had reportedly discussed Harry's behavior with close friends, fellow actors, and even producers, evaluating the impact of his actions and wondering how someone with access to fame, wealth, and global attention could wield it responsibly. This wasn't just about an interview. This was about making a statement. Hanks wanted to challenge Harry's narrative publicly, to confront contradictions between image and reality in a way that would resonate with millions. He understood that the power of the stage, the cameras, and the audience could amplify a single word to seismic effect, and he was deliberate in his approach. Sources reveal that Hanks had rehearsed his phrasing, tested different angles, and even consulted with Seth Meyers' team to ensure the delivery carried maximum weight without appearing malicious. He wanted the word traitor to land perfectly, precisely, with impact and with moral clarity. And here's where the irony deepens. Hanks, the guy who plays heroes and embodies trust, was now about to publicly condemn someone who had, in the eyes of many, been positioned as a public figure of morality himself. Harry, after all, had carefully cultivated an image of empathy, heroism, and modernity. He had narratives about duty, service, and the courage to break with tradition. Yet Hank's perception, informed by insider knowledge and personal judgment, was that Harry had crossed lines that could no longer be ignored. It wasn't personal malice. It wasn't a vendetta. It was accountability, carried out in front of the world, in a format designed to maximize attention, reflection, and consequence. Insiders describe Hank's preparation as meticulous. He wasn't just thinking about Harry. He was thinking about every single person watching. He understood that millions of viewers had preconceived notions about the prince, about Hollywood, and about the intersection of these worlds. He knew how to craft words that would resonate, words that would provoke reflection, words that would challenge perceptions without alienating the audience entirely. And he knew, as any seasoned actor would, how to leverage silence, body language, and timing. Every pause, every tilt of the head, every inflection was calculated for impact. But here's the twist. It wasn't just about Harry's behavior or public image. Hanks was also sending a message to Hollywood itself. In private circles, he had long voiced frustration with celebrities who exploit platforms for personal gain while neglecting broader responsibility. Harry, with his global platform, had become an unintentional poster child for this phenomenon. By confronting him on live television, Hanks was asserting a subtle lesson about accountability, not just to the audience, but to peers, institutions, and the world at large. It was a lesson delivered with precision, using a figure who symbolized influence, vulnerability, and human decency. And then there's the layer nobody saw coming: Hank's moral compass. Sources reveal that he had been warned about potential backlash. Some suggested he would be criticized for stepping beyond Hollywood and into the royal sphere, for crossing lines that perhaps shouldn't be crossed in polite society. But Hanks ignored those warnings. His reasoning? The message was too important, and the timing was perfect. The stakes were high, and someone had to speak. Someone had to call out behavior that could influence millions, challenge narratives, and confront privilege in a way that mere commentary could never achieve. The irony is palpable. Harry, accustomed to deference, was walking into a situation where the rules were inverted. In royal circles, public figures are often shielded, advised, and guarded. There are aides, PR teams, palace protocols. But in Hollywood, particularly in the late-night format, the shields are removed. The audience watches. The cameras capture every nuance. And Tom Hanks, beloved by millions, trusted, revered, was now the arbiter of truth, judgment, and consequence. Even Seth Meyers could sense the tension. Sources say that he noticed subtle cues between the two men, micro-expressions, shifts in tone, and brief pauses that suggested unspoken history. The audience, of course, couldn't see the backstage dynamics, but they could feel it. There was a suspense in the air, a quiet anticipation that something unprecedented was about to happen. The stage was set not for light-hearted banter, but for a confrontation that would reverberate far beyond the studio. And this is where Harry's miscalculation becomes clear. He assumed that charm, reputation, and prior experience could shield him. He assumed that Hanks, a figure so universally loved, would be deferential, or at least neutral. But Hanks had a very different plan. He intended to use his platform to confront, to challenge, and to provoke reflection. And it wasn't just about words. It was about context, history, and timing. The careful orchestration meant that every viewer would feel the weight of the message, and every observer, be it Hollywood, the palace, or the public, would understand the implications. The meticulousness of Hanks' approach also extended to the emotional undertone. He wasn't angry. He wasn't performative. Instead, he delivered his words with calm authority, a moral weight that magnified the impact. The contrast between his calm delivery and the explosive content of his words created an unforgettable tension. Audiences later described it as shocking but inevitable, as if the words had been waiting to be spoken, and Hanks was the only person capable of articulating them with such precision. And yet, there were deeper layers still. Beyond accountability and public perception, Hanks was also sending a warning. A warning not just to Harry, but to anyone who might think that influence, privilege, or celebrity can shield them from scrutiny. In subtle ways, his words were a lesson, a mirror held up to power, fame, and responsibility. And that's the genius of the moment. The interplay between authority, morality, and spectacle created a drama that no one could ignore. But as the audience watched, completely unaware of the preparation, the private insights, and the stakes involved, Harry was about to confront the full force of this agenda. Every instinct, every carefully rehearsed answer, every ounce of composure would be tested. And in that moment, Tom Hanks' hidden agenda would no longer be hidden. It would explode in front of millions, leaving Harry and the world stunned. What happened next, of course, would become legendary. Because when Tom Hanks finally spoke, it wasn't just words. It was a verdict, and it was only the beginning. It happened so fast, yet in that instant, it felt like the world stopped. The lights of the late night with Seth Meyers' studio shone brighter. The audience leaned forward in collective suspense, and cameras rolled as if they too could sense the gravity of the moment. Then, calmly, deliberately, Tom Hanks uttered a single word that would reverberate across the globe: traitor. Imagine it. The audience, expecting light-hearted humor or celebrity banter, froze mid-laugh. Harry, sitting across from a man who had once embodied heroism on screen, felt the air thicken around him. It wasn't just the word itself. It was the way it landed, precise and unavoidable, delivered with a quiet authority that demanded attention. There was no room for deflection, no escape. Traitor. This word wasn't chosen lightly. Every syllable carried centuries of historical weight, cultural significance, and emotional resonance. To call someone a traitor is to question their loyalty, integrity, and allegiance. In Harry's case, the implication was seismic. It wasn't just about personal behavior. It was about public responsibility, global perception, and the shadow of legacy. And when a figure like Tom Hanks applies such a label, it is amplified beyond comprehension. People weren't just hearing it, they were feeling it. The studio audience reacted instinctively. Some gasped audibly, their reactions a mix of shock, excitement, and disbelief. Others stiffened, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. Cameras caught subtle shifts in body language. Hands tightened, shoulders rose, breaths paused. Even Seth Meyers, seasoned and quick-witted, found himself momentarily silenced. He knew when a moment carried weight, and this one had it in spades. For Harry, the experience was surreal. He had been through countless interviews, faced thousands of questions, and navigated the public eye with practiced poise. Yet nothing had prepared him for this. The calm, unyielding gaze of Tom Hanks, the moral authority behind the words, and the shock of the audience combined into a force that made him feel exposed, vulnerable, and unmoored. It was as if a mirror had been held up to him, reflecting back a version of himself he could no longer control. But the word traitor was more than just a label. It was a lightning rod for conversation, debate, and controversy. Social media erupted within seconds, millions of viewers dissecting the exchange in real time. Clips were shared, GIFs created, and hashtags trending globally. Every nuance of Harry's response, or lack thereof, was analyzed, debated, and interpreted. People wondered, did he realize what he had done? Did he recognize the implications of Hank's words? Or was he caught completely off guard, vulnerable in a way that millions had never seen? Behind the cameras, the tension was equally palpable. Sources reveal that Harry's aides were scrambling, whispering urgently in his ear, offering scripted responses and reminders of talking points. Meghan Markle's team, watching from a separate monitor, felt a mix of anxiety and disbelief. This wasn't just an awkward moment on a talk show. It was a public reckoning that had been years in the making. Every decision, every public statement, every Netflix interview, and every royal action seemed to converge in that one unforgettable instant. And the subtlety of Tom Hanks' delivery only heightened the impact. He didn't shout, he didn't attack. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but unwavering, each word measured and deliberate. The contrast between his composed demeanor and the explosive content of his statement created an emotional shockwave that rippled through the studio and into homes across the world. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Timing, inflection, and presence combined to make a single word unforgettable. Observers would later analyze Harry's reaction frame by frame. Microexpressions revealed fleeting shock, a tightness around the jaw, and a subtle narrowing of the eyes. His body language betrayed tension, discomfort, and perhaps even regret. Meanwhile, Tom's subtle nods and unwavering gaze reinforced the weight of his judgment. It was a moment of storytelling without a script, raw and unscripted, yet meticulously orchestrated for maximum impact. And then, as quickly as it landed, the room seemed to shift. Conversations that had been buzzing backstage quieted. Audience members whispered, unsure of what to do or how to react. Social media chatter exploded. News outlets scrambled to report, commentators speculated on motive, and memes spread the word faster than any official statement could. Within minutes, the narrative had begun to form. Tom Hanks had publicly called Prince Harry a traitor, and the world had watched, captivated, and horrified. But what exactly did Hanks mean by traitor? Was it personal, moral, political, or a combination of all three? The ambiguity was deliberate. By choosing a word so charged yet open to interpretation, Hanks ensured that the conversation would continue long after the cameras stopped rolling. People would debate, analyze, and speculate endlessly. It was a masterclass in influence and subtlety, ensuring that Harry's public image would be scrutinized from every angle. And the fallout didn't stop there. Studio insiders later revealed that after the cameras stopped, Harry was visibly shaken. He retreated to a private corner, taking a moment to process what had just happened. Staff whispered in hushed tones, trying to gauge his reaction, offering reassurances, and preparing damage control strategies. It wasn't just a single moment on television. It was the opening salvo of a larger narrative that would dominate headlines, social media feeds, and palace conversations for weeks to come. At the same time, the public reaction was immediate and intense. Clips of Hank's statement went viral within minutes, trending worldwide. Hashtags questioning Harry's loyalty began circulating, and commentators from all spheres, royal experts, Hollywood insiders, and everyday viewers, began weighing in. The word traitor carried weight not just because of its meaning, but because it came from someone with credibility, warmth, and global recognition. Hank's reputation amplified the impact far beyond what a casual insult or critique could achieve. Even Hollywood insiders noted the strategic genius of the moment. Hanks had managed to create a spectacle without appearing aggressive or malicious. He had made a point about accountability, privilege, and public responsibility while maintaining the image of a respected and trusted figure. It was confrontation executed with precision, moral authority, and the subtlety of a master storyteller. Yet, as impactful as the word traitor was, the story doesn't end there. Because behind the scenes, whispers and leaks began circulating almost immediately. Private communications, pre-interview discussions, and backstage reactions revealed a level of tension, anticipation, and even panic that the public could not see. Harry's aides were coordinating statements. Meghan Markle's team was assessing public sentiment, and the palace itself was quietly bracing for the potential fallout. The ripple effect of a single word had begun to move through multiple spheres of influence: Hollywood, royalty, media, and public opinion. And just when it seemed the moment had reached its peak, there was an additional layer: the subtle, almost imperceptible message Hanks embedded in his delivery. Observers noted how his tone, timing, and gaze seemed to communicate more than the word itself. It wasn't merely accusation, it was warning. It was reflection. It was a moral challenge. And in that moment, Harry, the world, and everyone watching felt it. The word had landed, but the story was far from over. Because here's the thing: once "traitor" was uttered, the narrative shifted. Harry was no longer simply a prince on a talk show. He became a symbol of scrutiny, a focal point for debate, and a lightning rod for controversy. Every word he spoke afterward, every gesture, every expression would be analyzed in the context of that moment. And millions of people would begin to form opinions not just about his public actions, but about his character, his judgment, and his place in both Hollywood and royal history. And as the cameras continued to roll, capturing reactions in real time, one thing became clear: this was more than a simple interview. This was a cultural event, a collision of worlds, a moment that would be replayed, dissected, and debated for years. Harry may have walked in expecting light-hearted conversation, but he had been thrust into a moral reckoning broadcast live to the world. And just when you think the tension couldn't possibly escalate further, insiders hinted that Hank's words were only the beginning. There were private conversations, backstage revelations, and subsequent footage that hinted at even deeper truths. The single word, "traitor," was just the tip of the iceberg. The cameras stopped rolling, the studio lights dimmed, and the audience erupted into applause, laughter, and murmurs. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere was electric in a way no one could have anticipated. The word "traitor" had landed, and it wasn't just a one-off comment. It was a detonator. Backstage, insiders describe a level of chaos and tension that perfectly mirrors a pressure cooker on the verge of explosion. What was meant to be a late-night interview had become the epicenter of a story that would reverberate through Hollywood, the royal family, and global media. Sources close to the production revealed that the moment Tom Hanks delivered the word, the studio staff were simultaneously awestruck and panicked. Producers whispered frantically to one another, trying to anticipate what Harry's response would be. Camera operators, normally trained to follow cues with mechanical precision, found themselves instinctively lingering on micro-expressions: the tightening of Harry's jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the subtle shift in posture that betrayed discomfort. Even Seth Meyers, usually quick to fill silence with humor, sensed the tension and allowed the moment to breathe. Every pause, every unspoken reaction, was loaded with significance. Backstage, Harry's aides were already in crisis mode. According to insiders, they had been prepared for mild scrutiny, playful jabs, even gentle provocation, but nothing prepared them for the calculated intensity of Hank's delivery. Whispers flew across the green room. "We need to manage this carefully," text the PR team. "Have a statement ready, just in case." The aides, some of whom had decades of experience navigating media storms for royals, admitted later that this was unlike anything they had seen. It was as if the rules of engagement had been rewritten in real time. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's team, watching via a remote feed, was equally tense. Their concern was not only for Harry's immediate reaction, but also for the long-term implications of such a public confrontation. Insiders described frantic text exchanges, video calls, and rapid-fire strategy meetings. Each message was weighed for tone, timing, and potential impact. The question was no longer just about the interview. It was about controlling a narrative that had already begun to spiral beyond anyone's immediate control. But it wasn't just the royal aides or Hollywood staff feeling the heat. Studio insiders later revealed that even members of the audience, particularly those seated in front-row positions with media credentials, sensed something unprecedented. The word traitor didn't simply resonate. It reverberated, creating a palpable tension that hung over the studio. It was the kind of energy that makes people instinctively lean forward, exchange looks, and whisper to each other. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with expectation, disbelief, and the unspoken realization that history was being made. And then there were the leaks. Within minutes, sources confirm, footage from backstage and text messages from staff began circulating among a small group of media insiders. Observers were stunned to learn that Harry's reaction had been far more complex than what the cameras captured. While outwardly composed, he had reportedly muttered under his breath, adjusted his seating nervously, and even briefly looked toward his aides for reassurance. These subtle cues, captured by quick-thinking staffers, added layers to the narrative that would later dominate headlines. The moment had been amplified not by malice but by meticulous observation, making every gesture and word significant. According to several sources, one of the most revealing aspects of the fallout occurred immediately after taping. Harry's aides described him as quiet, tense, and reflective, taking time alone in a corner before rejoining Meghan and their team. They noted that he seemed almost stunned, as if he hadn't fully processed the moral weight behind the word traitor. For someone accustomed to media scrutiny, award ceremonies, and public adulation, the directness of Hank's comment created a vulnerability rarely seen in a royal figure. It was a crack in the armor, however fleeting, and insiders knew that the ripple effects would extend far beyond the immediate moment. The media, of course, was already circling. Sources reveal that journalists in the green room, as well as those monitoring live feeds, immediately began speculating on the intent behind Hank's words. Some suggested it was a critique of Harry's public behavior. Others saw it as a subtle warning about privilege and responsibility. Within minutes, entertainment websites, social media feeds, and news outlets were reporting on the incident, framing it in ways that would dominate public conversation for days, weeks, and even months. The word traitor had escaped into the public domain, carrying with it implications far heavier than a typical celebrity jab. And while public opinion began forming, insiders were also noting a deeper, more personal reaction. Staff close to Hanks revealed that he had deliberately chosen his phrasing to provoke thought rather than anger. This was not an outburst fueled by malice or personal dislike. It was a calculated intervention meant to challenge perception, accountability, and narrative control. Hank's approach was surgical, precise, intentional, and morally resonant. In private discussions, he reportedly emphasized that the intent was to hold someone accountable for the influence they wield, especially when that influence has global implications. Even the palace was not immune to the fallout. Sources confirmed that briefings were underway, with aides rapidly assessing the implications of a Hollywood actor publicly condemning a royal figure. Conversations within Buckingham Palace reportedly focused on damage control, narrative framing, and understanding the broader implications of Hank's statement. It was a delicate balance, acknowledge the comment without amplifying it, while simultaneously preparing for the media storm that was already gathering momentum. The ripple effect extended across continents, highlighting the unprecedented intersection of Hollywood influence and royal visibility. Insiders also revealed that social media analytics began showing immediate spikes in engagement. Clips of the segment were shared across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, generating millions of views in real time. Memes, commentary, and reactions flooded the platforms, creating a feedback loop that magnified the impact of Hank's words exponentially. Even casual viewers who had no interest in royal affairs were drawn in, captivated by the drama, the stakes, and the stark contrast between Hollywood charisma and royal expectation. And yet, according to multiple sources, the most intriguing aspect of the fallout wasn't public opinion. It was private communication. Harry reportedly sent urgent messages to aides, Meghan, and trusted advisors, asking for counsel, perspective, and strategies to manage the growing storm. He was aware that the public perception of his reaction, however subtle, would carry immense weight. He also knew that his next moves would be scrutinized frame by frame, creating an unprecedented level of pressure. Meanwhile, backstage observers noted a quiet intensity from Tom Hanks. He did not celebrate or gloat. Rather, he maintained a composed demeanor, fully aware of the chaos his words had unleashed. His intent was not revenge or spectacle, it was intervention. A moral challenge presented on the world stage, using words as both scalpel and hammer. Insiders described him as measured, precise, and entirely deliberate in both action and presence. The message had been delivered. The consequences were unfolding. But the fallout didn't stop there. A few hours later, additional sources revealed that private communications between Hank's team and journalists were hinting at deeper insights. Hank's comment was reportedly informed by months of observation, insider knowledge, and understanding of Harry's public narrative. It wasn't impulsive. It was considered, deliberate, and strategically executed to highlight contradictions between Harry's image and actions. In other words, the single word wasn't just commentary. It was a revelation of truths hidden beneath carefully crafted appearances. And it didn't end with public perception or media coverage. Palace insiders claimed that the fallout prompted private conversations within the family itself. Discussions about trust, loyalty, and the perception of the monarchy were taking place in hushed tones. Questions were raised about influence, public responsibility, and the consequences of unfiltered commentary in the modern age. Harry's role, once carefully managed through traditional media and royal protocols, was now being evaluated under a new lens, one shaped by global perception, Hollywood commentary, and the moral authority of a figure like Tom Hanks. But perhaps the most shocking element revealed by inside sources was Harry's personal reaction after the interview. While maintaining public composure, he reportedly retreated to a private area, taking stock of the damage, assessing every word, and reflecting on the implications. Staff later admitted that they had never seen him in such a state, not during public ceremonies, royal tours, or even previous media confrontations. The impact of a single word, delivered with precision, had penetrated deeper than any public critique ever could. And while the public, the media, and the palace grappled with the aftermath, whispers continued to emerge, details that hinted at hidden tensions, backstage maneuvers, and unspoken dynamics that made the moment even more dramatic. It became clear that the word traitor was not the end of the story. It was the spark that ignited a chain of events with consequences that would unfold over months, and perhaps even years. Because insiders knew something the public didn't. What happened next, in private, would escalate the drama in ways no one could predict. Conversations, leaks, and strategic moves behind the scenes hinted at deeper conflicts, betrayals, and revelations yet to surface. And as the world debated, Harry's advisors scrambled to navigate a landscape reshaped by one word. As the applause faded and the studio lights dimmed, Harry remained seated, staring blankly ahead, trying to process what had just unfolded. The audience thought the drama had ended, the cameras had stopped rolling, and the moment was over. But backstage, the reality was far different. According to multiple insiders, Harry was experiencing a private meltdown, a storm of emotions that had been building for months, but now reached a breaking point. What happened next would reveal the raw vulnerability of a prince accustomed to control, privilege, and admiration. Now stripped bare in front of a world that had just witnessed him being called a traitor by none other than Tom Hanks. It started with the silence. For several moments, Harry didn't move, didn't speak, and barely breathed. His aides, well-trained in managing public figures, quickly realized that they were dealing with a scenario far beyond standard crisis management. One source described the scene. He just sat there, like the weight of the world had dropped on him. His usual composure, the charm he uses in public, was gone. He was raw, human, and completely exposed. The aides leaned in, whispered reassurances, and attempted to guide him toward a private space. But Harry was temporarily unreachable. The public persona, the confident, polished, controlled royal, was gone. In those moments, Meghan Markle's influence became crucial. Sources indicate that Meghan, aware of the unfolding storm, immediately sought to support Harry, attempting to stabilize him emotionally and strategically. She had spent months preparing for media scrutiny, understanding how narratives could shift with a single misstep. But even she reportedly admitted to aides that the intensity of Hank's words and the public reaction exceeded anything they had anticipated. Meghan's calm, Strategic guidance in those backstage minutes would prove pivotal in helping Harry regain a semblance of control, though the emotional fallout lingered. Meanwhile, insiders reveal that Harry's allies began strategizing in real time. Close friends, royal aides, and legal advisors were all in constant communication, debating how to respond, or whether to respond at all. There was no playbook for this situation. No previous royal scandal had combined the moral authority of Hollywood with live television confrontation. Should they issue a statement? Should they try to downplay the word? Should they wait for the media storm to subside? Every decision carried risk, and every delay amplified the tension. Sources also describe a level of private reflection that Harry engaged in during the meltdown. He reportedly reviewed his public statements, past interviews, and media appearances in his mind, searching for any moment where he might have overstepped or misrepresented himself. According to insiders, this mental review was intense, exhausting, and emotionally draining. It became clear that the fallout wasn't just about Tom Hanks' words. It was about the cumulative weight of public perception, media narratives, and personal accountability. Every action he had taken over the previous months suddenly felt magnified, dissected, and open to moral judgment. Harry's aides noted subtle signs of panic. His hands trembled slightly, his breathing became shallow, and his gaze shifted repeatedly as he tried to process the magnitude of the confrontation. One aide whispered, "We've handled crises before, but never anything like this." Another described the scene as a perfect storm of pressure, humiliation, and reflection, emphasizing that the meltdown was both emotional and strategic. Harry was not only reacting to the immediate insult, but also calculating the long-term implications of how the world would interpret his reaction, or lack thereof. But it wasn't all despair. Sources reveal that allies close to Harry provided critical emotional support, helping him navigate the initial shock and begin formulating a response. Some offered historical perspective, reminding him that every royal figure faces public scrutiny. Others provided more strategic guidance, helping him assess media narratives and potential backlash. These allies became his lifeline, a buffer between private vulnerability and public perception. Even in the midst of his private meltdown, Harry reportedly thought about the broader implications for his relationship with Hollywood, the public, and the monarchy. He understood that Tom Hanks' comment carried moral weight, not just personal criticism. He realized that this was more than an insult. It was a message about accountability, influence, and integrity. And he knew that his next moves, how he handled himself, what he said publicly, and how he managed private communications, would determine whether he regained control or lost ground entirely. Sources also reveal that Meghan's role was critical during this period. She reportedly guided Harry through a series of mental exercises, assessing the situation objectively, identifying what could be controlled, and acknowledging what was beyond their influence. She emphasized the importance of strategic patience, calculated messaging, and careful timing. In many ways, Meghan became the anchor that allowed Harry to navigate the initial emotional fallout, turning a private crisis into an opportunity for reflection and eventual action. Meanwhile, communication lines with royal advisors were heating up. Sources indicate that private conversations with Buckingham Palace aides, legal counsel, and other insiders were being conducted in real time. They were assessing the damage, anticipating media narratives, and exploring ways to contain the fallout without further escalation. The presence of Tom Hanks as a moral authority added a unique layer of complexity. This was not a routine public relations challenge. It was a multidimensional crisis involving reputation, morality, public perception, and the delicate interplay between Hollywood and royalty. And then came the whispers about leaked backstage reactions. Staffers, already buzzing from the live moment, began sharing details with trusted media contacts. Sources indicate that Harry's initial reactions, his tense posture, muted gestures, and private conversations, were quickly relayed to insiders. While these leaks were minor at first, they provided a window into Harry's vulnerability and humanized him in ways that were impossible to ignore. The world could now see a prince grappling with a moral and public reckoning, struggling to reconcile his image with the weight of an unexpected public condemnation. Interestingly, insiders also revealed that Harry began thinking strategically during his meltdown. While emotionally raw, he reportedly started formulating ways to control the narrative. Which messages should be sent? Which conversations should be initiated? Which public statements could recalibrate perception? He began leveraging his allies, both in Hollywood and within his own inner circle, to craft a multi-pronged approach that balanced emotional vulnerability with strategic messaging. Allies reportedly emphasized the need to maintain composure, even as emotions ran high. One source described a whispered exchange. You need to show humanity, but also strength. This isn't just about how you feel. It's about how the world interprets your actions. Harry reportedly absorbed this advice, taking it to heart, while still wrestling with the emotional weight of being called a traitor by one of the most respected figures in entertainment. At the same time, sources reveal that a small number of trusted aides began reaching out to Hollywood contacts for insight. They wanted to understand Hank's perspective, motivations, and intentions. Was this a personal attack, a moral judgment, or part of a larger cultural critique? Answers were unclear, but these conversations highlighted the unprecedented nature of the crisis. Harry wasn't just managing a royal scandal. He was navigating a collision between Hollywood influence and global reputation in real time. By the end of the evening, Harry reportedly began to regain some composure, though the emotional weight lingered. Sources indicate he recognized that this moment was a turning point, one that could redefine how he was perceived publicly and privately. Allies continued to guide him, offering support, advice, and strategic insight. Yet even with this guidance, the shadow of Tom Hanks' words loomed large. And as the private fallout continued, insiders hinted at a revelation that would soon escalate the drama even further. A single private conversation, a leaked detail, or an unanticipated reaction was poised to emerge, threatening to amplify the impact of the live moment and draw Harry deeper into a storm that few could have foreseen. Because while the public had only seen a glimpse, the private meltdown, the frantic consultations, and the strategic deliberations backstage painted a picture of a royal under siege, one caught between emotion, public scrutiny, and the far-reaching influence of a man like Tom Hanks. If you thought the storm ended with Harry's private meltdown, think again. Because while he was grappling with shock, humiliation, and uncertainty backstage, there was another force quietly stepping into the arena. Meghan Markle. She had been watching the live segment with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, fully aware that Tom Hanks' words could tip the scales of public opinion in a single moment. And make no mistake, Meghan was not just a bystander in this unfolding drama. She was a strategist, a tactician, and a player who knew exactly how to maneuver when the stakes were highest. The minute Hanks said the word traitor, Meghan reportedly froze, her eyes widening as she absorbed the full magnitude of the confrontation. Her mind raced, processing every nuance. Harry's immediate reaction, the audience's stunned silence, the subtle inflection in Hanks' delivery. Sources close to her describe a rare moment of vulnerability, one that would later fuel both criticism and admiration for her ability to pivot under pressure. In that instant, she knew that the public's perception of Harry, and by extension, of herself, was shifting dramatically, and she had to act fast. Backstage, Meghan's team immediately activated. Sources reveal that she was in constant communication with Harry's aides, the studio's production staff, and even legal advisors. Her objective was clear: contain the fallout, support Harry emotionally, and ensure that the narrative didn't spiral out of control. Every action, every suggestion, every whispered word was calibrated to maintain composure while simultaneously shaping public perception. According to insiders, Meghan was like a general on the battlefield, orchestrating a defense while the enemy's artillery, Tom Hanks' words, had already struck deep. Yet, as calm and composed as Meghan appeared to outsiders, insiders hint at the emotional intensity bubbling beneath the surface. She reportedly paced, gestured, and spoke with a rapid-fire energy that revealed her investment in the outcome. Some aides later admitted that they had never seen her operate under such immediate, high-stakes pressure. Her role in these moments went beyond support. She was actively analyzing, strategizing, and anticipating the next wave of consequences. Every nuance of Harry's reaction, every public whisper, every media interpretation had to be accounted for. and she was determined not to let the narrative slip from their control. Interestingly, sources indicate that Meghan's reaction was twofold: emotional and strategic. Emotionally, she was shaken. She had spent years navigating media scrutiny, understanding the pitfalls of public life, and building a public persona that combined poise with relatability. Seeing Harry targeted in such a direct, morally charged way tested her resilience. Strategically, however, she shifted immediately into problem-solving mode. She understood that the fallout could be catastrophic if not managed properly, and she knew she had to act decisively. One of Meghan's first moves, insiders reveal, was to convene an emergency discussion with Harry and their closest advisors. They assessed the situation, reviewed footage of the segment, and brainstormed responses to potential media narratives. Questions were raised about whether to issue a public statement, how to frame Harry's demeanor, and how to subtly counteract the moral authority behind Hank's words. It was a delicate balancing act. Too much response could amplify the drama. Too little could signal weakness or agreement. Meghan's influence in these discussions was crucial. Her perspective helped shape the immediate strategy while reinforcing Harry's emotional stability. Meanwhile, sources report that Meghan began considering broader implications beyond the immediate media storm. She was acutely aware that Hank's critique carried weight not just in Hollywood, but in the royal sphere, in global media, and across public opinion. The intersection of Hollywood prestige and royal scrutiny created a pressure cooker environment, and Meghan quickly recognized that this was a moment where every word, gesture, and decision mattered. She needed to protect Harry, herself, and the carefully curated image they had spent years cultivating. Interestingly, insiders reveal that Meghan also had to manage the reactions of other allies. Hollywood friends, PR consultants, and private confidants were all in motion, trying to understand the implications of Hank's words. Some were urging caution, some were offering strategies for public messaging, and others were simply observing the unfolding chaos. Meghan became the central hub for all of this activity, synthesizing advice, prioritizing actions, and ensuring that every decision reinforced the ultimate objective: protect Harry, mitigate damage, and maintain narrative control. At the same time, Meghan reportedly engaged in private conversations with Tom Hanks' representatives. These discussions, according to insiders, were subtle but deliberate attempts to gauge intent, clarify the moral reasoning behind his words, and anticipate future implications. Meghan understood that Hank's critique was not just a one-off comment. It was a calculated intervention with long-term consequences. By engaging proactively, she sought to understand the terrain, identify potential allies or mitigators, and prepare for the next phase of public scrutiny. Backstage, the emotional tension was at its peak. Sources describe Meghan as simultaneously focused and fierce, moving between calm reassurance for Harry and rapid-fire coordination with aides, consultants, and media contacts. She was navigating a storm where one misstep could have catastrophic consequences for both her husband and herself. The intensity of this period was compounded by the live nature of the broadcast. What happened on camera was only half the story. Behind the scenes, the stakes were exponentially higher. Interestingly, Meghan's strategic instincts extended to social media monitoring. Sources reveal that she and her team were tracking hashtags, comments, and trending topics in real time, analyzing public sentiment and identifying potential narratives. This level of attention allowed them to anticipate how the story might evolve, prepare responses, and even counteract potential misinterpretations. Meghan's ability to synthesize information and act decisively under pressure became a central factor in managing the fallout. But there was another layer to Meghan's involvement that few outside insiders could appreciate. Sources hint at her ability to anticipate public perception in ways that Harry could not. While he was focused on the immediate emotional impact, she was considering how the story would be framed over hours, days, and weeks. She understood that Hank's words were not just commentary, they were a cultural moment, and she knew that their response, or lack thereof, could define public opinion and shape narratives for the foreseeable future. Even amidst all this chaos, Meghan reportedly remained acutely aware of her own image. Sources suggest that she was balancing the need to support Harry with the need to maintain her personal reputation and authority. Her presence, influence, and strategic guidance during this period reinforced her role as a central figure in managing not just the immediate fallout, but the broader narrative surrounding the Sussexes. Yet, despite her poise and strategic thinking, the emotional intensity of the moment was undeniable. Sources reveal that Meghan experienced a range of feelings: shock, frustration, determination, and even fear. She understood that a single misstep could exacerbate the crisis. She knew that the world was watching, that Hollywood and royal observers alike were scrutinizing her every move, and that the stakes were unprecedented. And yet, she persisted, balancing emotional intensity with calculated strategy in a way that few could replicate. But the complexity of the situation didn't stop there. Sources indicate that private messages between Meghan, Harry, and their advisors were circulating in real time, revealing an intricate web of communication, coordination, and rapid decision-making. Every whisper, every suggestion, every strategic move was designed to navigate the immediate chaos while laying the groundwork for long-term reputation management. Meghan's involvement was critical, and her influence was both decisive and subtle, a masterclass in crisis management under pressure. And just when it seemed that Meghan had established some control over the situation, insiders revealed a shocking twist. A leaked conversation between studio staff hinted at a private reaction from Harry that suggested the meltdown was far from over. Meghan would have to step in again, reinforcing calm, providing counsel, and preparing him for the next wave of consequences, both public and private. The drama, in other words, was only intensifying. Because while the cameras had stopped, the real story was just beginning. Meghan had entered the chaos not as a passive observer, but as a central strategist, a moral anchor, and an active participant. Her actions, decisions, and influence would shape the fallout in ways the public could not yet see, and would set the stage for revelations, conflicts, and consequences that would soon dominate headlines and social media feeds alike. As the studio lights dimmed and the live cameras stopped rolling, the world outside erupted. Within minutes, the word traitor, delivered with the calm authority of Tom Hanks, had traveled faster than anyone could have anticipated. Social media feeds ignited, news outlets scrambled for coverage, and hashtags began trending globally. It was as if the entire planet collectively leaned forward to witness the fallout, and the narrative snowballed almost instantly. The moment was no longer confined to a single studio. It had become a global spectacle, dissected frame by frame, word by word. Within moments, clips from the show flooded Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Millions of viewers replayed Tom Hanks' delivery, examining his calm demeanor, his deliberate pauses, and the piercing weight behind the word traitor. Commentators and pundits from every corner of the internet began speculating on the intent behind the remark. Some framed it as a critique of Harry's behavior, while others interpreted it as a moral judgment on privilege, responsibility, and public perception. The online discussion was immediate, relentless, and impossible to ignore. News outlets, sensing a perfect storm, jumped into action. Within minutes, headlines appeared across major media platforms. Tom Hanks calls Prince Harry a traitor on late night. Hollywood icon versus British royalty. The moment everyone's talking about, and Prince Harry stunned as Tom Hanks delivers moral verdict live. The story spread like wildfire, with commentary ranging from outrage to fascination. Every journalist, editor, and social media influencer recognized that this was more than an ordinary celebrity exchange. It was a cultural moment with the potential to redefine public perception of both Harry and Meghan Markle. Public reaction was equally immediate. Sources reveal that fan communities, royal watch forums, and Hollywood discussion boards erupted within minutes. Longtime supporters of Harry struggled to reconcile the image of the prince they admired with the stark judgment delivered by one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. Critics, meanwhile, seized on the opportunity to amplify the narrative of recklessness, entitlement, and privilege. The word traitor became a lightning rod for debate, with millions weighing in on Twitter threads, live commentaries, and discussion panels across multiple platforms. The speed of dissemination was unprecedented. Within the first hour, millions had seen clips of the interview, and engagement metrics were off the charts. Social media algorithms, hungry for activity, amplified the content further, ensuring that even casual viewers who had no prior interest in royal affairs were now drawn into the story. Every retweet, comment, and share added momentum, creating a feedback loop that magnified both the reach and impact of Hank's words. According to insiders, the virality was almost instantaneous, a digital wildfire that spread across continents and demographics. Media outlets quickly analyzed Harry's reactions in detail. Frame-by-frame breakdowns of his expressions were published, highlighting microexpressions, shifts in body language, and subtle cues that suggested emotional turmoil. Analysts debated the implications. Was he hurt, shocked, defensive, or calculating? Public relations experts weighed in on what this meant for his public image, dissecting every gesture as if it were evidence in a trial. The world was scrutinizing a private human moment on a scale previously unimaginable, all triggered by a single word. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's influence behind the scenes became a focal point for media speculation. Sources revealed that her calm, strategic coordination had played a pivotal role in helping Harry regain composure. Journalists and commentators began highlighting her presence as a stabilizing force, noting how her guidance might have mitigated what could have been an even more dramatic public meltdown. The media narrative began to shift from purely Hanks versus Harry to a more complex triangle. The moral authority of Hollywood, the vulnerability of a royal, and the strategic presence of Meghan Markle. Leaked backstage details further fueled the frenzy. Staffers and insiders shared private observations. Harry's tense posture, whispered guidance from aides, and subtle moments of reflection. The media, eager for any additional insight, seized upon these leaks, amplifying the narrative and providing viewers with an almost real-time look at the private fallout. The story was evolving faster than any traditional PR response could keep pace, and every micro-detail became fodder for commentary, speculation, and debate. The explosive media coverage wasn't limited to online platforms. Television networks aired segments analyzing the moment, with experts debating the implications for Harry, Meghan, and the monarchy. Late-night hosts referenced the confrontation, sometimes humorously, sometimes critically. International outlets picked up the story, examining the cultural significance of a Hollywood legend publicly confronting a royal. The narrative was omnipresent, saturating news cycles, trending topics, and public consciousness worldwide. And yet, according to insiders, the media explosion only intensified backstage chaos. Harry and Meghan's team were inundated with calls, messages, and inquiries from journalists seeking comment or clarification. The pace was relentless, the scrutiny unyielding, and every decision carried weight. Insiders describe a near-panic atmosphere, where every word had to be weighed, every response calculated, and every public interaction considered in the context of an international audience. The stakes were no longer hypothetical. They were immediate, tangible, and potentially career-defining. Interestingly, sources reveal that even Hanks himself was aware of the magnitude of the explosion. He reportedly anticipated that the word traitor would create shockwaves, but the speed and intensity of the public reaction seemed to exceed expectations. His calm, deliberate delivery had achieved its intended effect, capturing attention, provoking thought, and forcing reflection. Yet the extent of the media frenzy underscored the unpredictable nature of public perception and the degree to which a single word could dominate discourse on a global scale. As the media exploded, Harry reportedly began receiving a flood of messages from allies, advisors, and trusted contacts. Some offered reassurance, others strategic guidance, and some expressed shock or concern. Sources indicate that the private communications were intense, rapid, and emotionally charged, reflecting the unprecedented nature of the situation. Harry was now not only navigating public scrutiny, but also coordinating a private strategy to manage the fallout, assess media narratives, and anticipate future consequences. And then came the social media backlash. Memes, commentary, and viral posts spread like wildfire. The word traitor was dissected in thousands of threads, with users debating its meaning, appropriateness, and implications. Public opinion began to shift in real time, with some defending Harry, some criticizing him, and others attempting to analyze the moral and cultural ramifications of the confrontation. The conversation was multi-layered, spanning personal reputation, institutional authority, and the broader cultural significance of Hollywood influencing monarchy. Insiders reveal that the intensity of the media reaction caught even seasoned PR professionals off guard.